just for the question that you started with, like where it fits on the spectrum. So I told you like I didn't have any awareness of like the different denominations, but like broadly, from my understanding now, so Protestantism is more liberal, more open to anyone from the outside, let's say, and you have like so many like endless denominations within Protestantism, um, partially because it like protests against what was, let's say. And then when you once you've opened that rabbit hole, it's like you can endlessly like protest against the next one and the next one and the next one and
Hmm.
like create your own
Interesting.
little thing, which is where all these different denominations I think came from. And then I think that you have like Catholicism, which is a bit more about ritual and less. So to go back to Protestantism for a second, there's like a long sermon, like you get a guy speaking in front of you, which will take a while, and ritual is less important. So I grew up not having communion often. So what is it? How do I say in English proper? Communion is good.
Yeah, yeah. Communion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we would have it like every once in a while, but it'd be kind of something weird. Whereas I think in Catholicism you have it every service that you go to. So it's ritual is more important. Um, and I think rules are generally more important the more um, orthodox you get, let's say. So um, orthodoxy is I think like hardcore Christianity to
Mhm.
explain it in some way. Like you do the fasting, the services are like extremely long. It's so much ritual. There's incense, and it's like it's
It's
almost
in
going
some
back to
ways,
the basis. Go ahead.
yeah, is it like it's like a continuation of it's almost like it almost seems to me, let me step back three times. Jesus, Jesus, when, in the Gospels, he was like, I've often conceptualized it in some writing as like the Dark Knight in the tyrannical order, so to speak, right? So he's the will it focus? He's the dark he's the dark dot in the tyrannical order, right? So in the Jewish law, there was like, you follow these, it was more orthodox in that
Mm.
in the sense that you're presenting right now, where, when Jesus came up to the guy whose sheep had fallen into a ditch on the Sabbath, he was like, okay, we have rules. The rules are important, but like he basically was saying like the spirit of things is what truly matters, and the rules should be pointing you to the spirit. And so if there's a time where, it aligns with the less rigid to break the rules, then
Yeah,
that's okay. It was like a rebalancing in that.
for sure.
Um, I keep on getting self-conscious in that technical sense, of like noticing that I'm
Yeah,
talking, and then noticing myself noticing that I'm talking, and then I'm paying attention to that self, and then I lose self number one, where self number one is going. So
I will
I'm
add
sure you
something
guys
to
can
what you
relate.
said.
Yeah.
Can I add something there? Because so you can read the New Testament in many different ways, and in many ways, Jesus was like revolutionary. Like what you're saying, you have this whole structure, and he's basically breaking that open. Um, and that's the interesting thing with the denominations. Like, how do you look at that? Do you look at that and say, okay, our religion has to be radically open as well, and has to be like for everyone because he speaks to the prostitutes, he speaks to the tax collectors and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And the Orthodox way of looking at that is like, no, the structure is still very important, and Jesus says that as well. Like you still have to follow the rules. It's also in the spirit. Like the spirit is important, so it goes beyond the rules. Um, and so yeah, there's many different ways to look at that, at that story and that character. Not saying Jesus is a fictional character, but I'm just saying like symbolically speaking, like what does that mean for you in your daily life? But yeah, that's just something that came up for me.
I always used to, I think for most of my life, I viewed right and wrong as rights. Right is over here and wrong is over here, you know? And it was a study of Eastern philosophical tradition that sort of changed that for me. And even in my reading of the Gospels, as well as one, I saw Jesus as someone who was a bringer of balance and not someone who, like, and what I mean when I say that, I'll give you two different images maybe. So right, instead of conceptualizing right and wrong as on opposite sides of the spectrum, viewing more like right as the proper balancing of things and wrong as when things have become imbalanced in either direction. You might be, there are times where you need to be soft and tough, and the right thing to do is the proper balancing of the softness and the hardness or the toughness. And then Jesus talked about the pathway to the kingdom of heaven is like straight and narrow. It's like a narrow, straight road. And then in that same conceptualization, I think of that as like being properly balanced. And there's many ways to be improperly balanced and one straight, narrow way to be balanced. You could be slightly in this direction, slightly in that direction. Does that make you think anything?
You can go ahead, Emily.
Yeah. Um, I think that brings it back to the biblical lectures and Peterson pointing out that you should have one foot in chaos and one in order. So one foot in what's known and one in what's unknown, and that's where you're properly balanced. I'd never heard that before, except in kind of a like Taoist flavored kind of thing, but I wouldn't know what to do with it. Like it's a cool image, but what do you do with it? And then he kind of puts it more pragmatically. Um, about knowing what to do in the moment, which is more like wisdom, right? Rather than just relying on a rigid set of rules. I remember there was a really funny thing he said once that stuck with me so much. He said he was explaining how he had made himself the metropolitan of a church that he made up.
Hmm.
Metropolitan is like a antiquated term like bishop or something like that. He was marrying some friends of his. He was what is it called? Ordaining himself on the internet. And he was describing how he had to make up a church because he could, and so he named it
Wait, I'm
like
sorry. Jordan was saying this?
Jordan was describing this.
Okay.
This was like early on, and he went to go speak at an Orthodox institution. I don't know where. I think it was a
Hmm.
church, and Pedro was there, and he was very tired because a lot of things had happened that week, like in the news with him, with interviews and stuff like that. And he started saying how he made himself the metropolitan of this church that he made up. And it's the church of someone I mentioned when I talked with Lucas. It's Saint Joachim de Fiora. And that guy's idea was that of like there's this idea of the paraclete of the Holy Spirit being like innate in people. And having that means something like choosing, like having the wisdom in the moment to choose like the right and wrong rather than having a black and white rule book. Right. So all the time having one foot in order and one foot in chaos, actually, instead of always like rigidly, this is what we do, we never break the tradition, or alternatively being like we turn over every rule, we break every rule open. Um, so I probably went on kind of a tangent, it's a favorite tangent of mine, but that's what it made me think of.
That's
Hmm.
super cool.
Hmm.
Actually, it makes me think of the way in which the different denominations like balance each other out as well. So the Orthodox they keep the rules stable in that sense, and then the Protestants like the dynamic chaos that um yeah that keeps that it keeps it flowing in a sense. But then the question is for yourself, like, does that mean you just don't throw yourself into any denomination and just like take a bit of both? Because that's how I've been looking at it for a while now. Where I'm like, yeah, but now I'm just not going to church. Whereas that's also
Hmm.
something that seems important because it's participation and it's taking part in reality and in the story and stepping inside of it and having the community and all these arguments that Peterson and Peugeot make, for example. But yeah, so it's found even within the different denominations as well as in your own life, where it's like you got to balance these things, and that's the only way it can keep existing. Because if it's too um, orderly, then it falls away in stone, let's say, and it solidifies too much. And if it's too chaotic, yeah. So it's a brilliant way in which you can see the world and like patterns unfolding societally, politically, in your personal life, how you deal with like a diet. I find it really helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just the frame as a whole is so
yeah,
helpful. I don't know how I like existed before. I I pretty much everything that I think about, I'm looking through this like balance frame nowadays, and I realized like I don't even know how I possibly got through existence before, when I was like, oh, like right's over here and wrong's over here, because it just doesn't fit like in like any complex model to me now. But that idea of like, okay, no, 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 okay, like I've identified a thing, what's its polarity, how should I be uh dealing with like the tension in between, you know?
Like, how do you relate to it instead of just like chopping everything to bits, kind of?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.